You ever seen this picture right here?
Yeah, I have.
So that's real.
That's real?
That's a real life person, bro.
I thought it was like some Gmod shit or some AI.
That's real, bro.
So what the f is that?
It was this doctor, William Bailey. He was a self-proclaimed doctor, and basically he ended up making this magic potion, that is what he called it, and it was called Radithor, which basically was just radium mixed with water.
What the fuck is radium?
It's a very, very highly radioactive substance, bro.
Don't tell me he drinks it.
And supposedly it's supposed to cure anything that you're feeling, any pain, weakness in your body is supposed to kill it, also improve your sex drive. So this guy, Eben Byers, he ended up injuring himself. He was a professional golf player, and he ended up injuring his arm, so it was hindering him from doing anything, and he was also losing ability in the bed. He started realizing that as he was using it, he was feeling
benefits,
and then he thought, if I feel like this, now imagine how it would be if I take more. So he's taking like 10 times more than the regular dose than what the doctor prescribed. Over time, he ended up getting sick, so he ended up giving himself cancer. He was thinking that by taking more of it, he was going to feel better,
but it just had the opposite effect.
He started feeling that his teeth were loose, and they ended up just popping out to the point where he lost his whole teeth and his whole jaw. And a lot of people were taking this shit, bro, and it was because that guy Bailey, he was telling doctors, if you prescribe this to people.
A woman was driving on a highway when she noticed headlights behind her. The car then drove up beside her and suddenly went behind her again. The woman began getting nervous. The car then drove up bumper to bumper and began flashing its high beams. The car followed her very closely and kept turning its high beams on and off. The woman kept focusing on the car, and when her exit came, she got off, and so did the car behind her, still flashing its high beams on and off. The woman then called 911 and told them a car was following her and flashing its high beams at her. The woman gave them her address, and as she approached her house, she saw red and blue lights. But as she pulled into her driveway, so did the other car, still flashing its high beams on and off like a maniac. 2 police officers then got out of their car and pulled the man from the vehicle that was following her. They then handcuffed him, but he began screaming, "Someone is in your car." The police then suddenly pointed their guns in the woman's direction and fired, and when she turned around, she saw the bloody corpse of a murderer fall out of her back seat. There was a big butcher knife in his hand, and when police searched the car, they found duct tape, a blindfold, and handcuffs. The woman then realized the man in the strange car was trying to save her life. When the police released him, he explained as he pulled up behind her car, his light lit up her back seat and he saw a man with a butcher knife rising up behind her. And as the man was about to stab her, he flashed his high beams and the man crouched back down. He said he flashed his high beams every time he saw the man raise the knife.
What? People in Alert Bay say they've been hearing strange screams and howls from the forest at night. It's an eerie recording captured on a cell phone.
We heard it once, and I didn't get the recording. Second time, I got the recording, and that's when I was on the back porch. Very eerie.
This summer, I've heard it 3 times. I've heard it scream 3 times. But, it's been coming here for years. She went up to the graveyard to, pay respects to one of her family. And when she went up to the graveyard, she seen it standing there. She turned around and she got out of there right away. She didn't even go to the graveyard.
Yeah, they took off right away. They don't even stay there anymore after the dark.
One man says he encountered the mythic beast just last week.
I tried to call him.
He got something that frightened even the self-proclaimed mountain man.
This thing was 10 foot tall. He had beautiful hair. I come out here and rough talked him and run him off.
Got him to leave, called 911, then the creature came back.
And I said, "Get away from here. Get. And he went right back out that path again. It looked like he had 6 fingers on each hand.
It scared me. There was a 8 to 10 foot hairy man looking person was killing some animals, breaking in chicken houses, killing chickens.
Not just one, he says 3 different Bigfoot stared at him from the hill. This is just a snippet of 10 minutes of video Teek says he recorded.
He's moving.
Some believe a legend lives among them.
Like, I couldn't believe that my eyes had actually seen it. You know.
Biscardi claims to have found the creature's footprints and a mysterious hand that he claims was DNA tested and found to be something totally unknown.
This is a
a hotbed where a real true Bigfoot researcher is going to stay.
There have been dozens of alleged Bigfoot sightings since 1998.
You see how easy of a vantage point for something in the night, in the dark, to be sitting right here looking down at us at our campfire?
On the way up the mountain, one member of the team claims he had a possible sighting. They found clear large tracks.
Look what we got here.
There's another one up here. They're not dumb. There's some sort of intelligence.
They believe Bigfoot is nocturnal, and this footage shows what Biscardi believes is a creature. See that movement far right of the video? Something running to the left, then crossing again, knocking down a tree.
I don't think it is a human. I think it's a Sasquatch.
It was a bluebird January morning here in the foothills of northeast Provo when a group of guys saw a figure on the mountain that looked like something they've never seen before.
She says the Sasquatch sighting started back in March.
There's one, there's another one.
Footprints are Vicky's proof.
A 16-inch plaster cast. That's a big print.
It was huge. It was on two legs. It was bipedal. The hair on the head and the body was real stringy and matted. There was no hair on the face, and the nose was flat.
A creature that's that big is going to have a consistent water source and a large food source. There just isn't the water there to be able to sustain these sorts of creatures. If these creatures are out there, they have to die at some point. Why isn't anybody finding them?
I spoke to a curator from the Natural History Museum of Utah who says it's safe to say that Sasquatch is not something that would even exist.
What's the likelihood that there are big animals that have gone undetected by scientists and by trained observers? There are lots of undiscovered things, particularly in the natural world, but they don't take the form of giant apes.
This case will put you off ever talking to anyone online ever again. This male stabbed his girlfriend over 90 times and then FaceTimed his sister to show her the dead body. Ashley Wadsworth was a bright young girl. She was very sporty and musical, loved playing tennis and also the clarinet. In 2015, she met Jack Seppel on Facebook. Now, Ashley was roughly 11 or 12 and Jack was about 15 or 16. As young people do, they spend ages and ages just talking online, chatting about life and really getting to know each other. Ashley was actually from Canada and Jack was from Essex in the UK. This was a really long distance friendship, and over the years they grew closer and closer, and when Ashley turned 16, the relationship became quite romantic. Jack treated Ashley really nicely at first and was showering her with attention and gifts. Eventually, Ashley grew quite fond of him and she decided she wanted to meet up. She asked her parents often if she could travel to meet Jack in the UK, but obviously they were apprehensive. They felt it was risky because obviously he lived in a different country and the pair had never met. To try and make them more comfortable with this, Jack actually spoke to Ashley's family. He tried to reassure them that she would be safe with him and he said he would guard her with his life. Little did they know she wouldn't need protection from anyone apart from him. In November 2021, when Ashley was 19, the pair met for the first time. They went sightseeing around London and Ashley documented their travels on social media. To the outside world, things looked great. However, things started to take a dark turn over the next couple of months. Gradually, Jack started controlling everything Ashley was doing. He started demanding to know where she was at all times and demanding her social media passwords. Now, this made Ashley very uncomfortable, obviously, but she was in a really difficult position. She was in a foreign country and she was staying with Jack. Jack then started to become physically abusive towards her. He covered her with bruises and in one horrifying altercation he actually smashed a glass over her head. Ashley tried to reach out to people for help, but it was clear she was terrified of Jack. At one point she sent her friend a message warning, "Be careful what you say, he's watching." She then unsent the message to try and hide that communication. On the 1st of February 2022, Ashley turned up at Jack's mum's house with no shoes on, crying hysterically. Jack had smashed her phone up, cut her hand and beaten her up. Following this incident, her parents actually booked her a flight home. Things had become far too dangerous for her to stick around. As I said before though, she was in a foreign country alone with nowhere to stay, so she had to go back to Jack's house to wait to catch her flight. That day, when it was nighttime in Canada, Ashley's sister received a text begging for her to wake up and answer the phone. Now, she obviously didn't see this until she woke the following day, and then she tried and failed to get through to Ashley. She had no idea what was going on, and that's when police showed up to Jack's house. He refused to open the door, so they forced entry and found a hideous scene. Jack had been lying next to Ashley's dead body in a pool of blood. Shockingly, Jack had FaceTimed his sister to show her the dead body. Jack was arrested and admitted to strangling and stabbing his girlfriend. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 23.5 years.
He disappeared after his car was seen swerving across the highway. Some witnesses say that no one was driving it, but others claim to have seen someone else not matching his description jump out of the passenger seat and run into the woods. This is the mysterious disappearance of Logan Schendelman, and nothing is more bizarre to me than when someone goes missing after crashing their car. There are so many cases like this, it seriously needs to be studied. So 19-year-old Logan was last seen on May 19th, 2016. He lived with his grandma and sister in Tumwater, Washington, and that morning he told his grandma that he would likely be away for the entire weekend. Logan never knew his dad and was raised by his grandma pretty much all of his life, even though his mom lived close by in Olympia. His grandma said that on that morning, Logan seemed nervous, which wasn't like his usual self. He said that he had an epiphany about himself, and when she asked him what it was, he said that he couldn't really explain it. She said that they would talk more about this later that night, and then they both went off to work, but this would be the last time that she would ever talk to him. At around 2 p.m. a day later, multiple people started calling 911 after seeing Logan's car swerve across 3 lanes on I-5 near Tumwater and Maytown in Thurston County. People driving by said that it appeared that no one was driving the car, but eventually the car crashed into the center median, and this is where this case gets bizarre. Several people said that they saw a white man with either brown or red hair jump out of the passenger seat and then run into the woods along the interstate. When police arrived, they found Logan's car abandoned near exit 95, but no one was inside. This was about 20 miles from his home. All of his personal belongings were still inside the car, including his wallet, driver's license, and phone. They initially searched for roughly 6 hours in the surrounding woods, but nothing was found or stood out, so they had his car impounded. Meanwhile, Logan's grandma had no idea what was happening until later that night, when Logan never returned home. It wasn't totally uncommon for him to not come home for a day or two being a young kid, but by the next day she had a feeling that something was really wrong. So she ended up tracking Logan's phone to where it last pinged, which was in Olympia, and so she figured that he was just visiting his mom who lived in that area. I didn't even know that this was legal, but apparently the Thurston County Police Department was closed for the weekend, so Logan's grandma had to wait 2 days to report him missing. When she did though, the police told her everything that had happened a few days prior, how witnesses saw his car swerving across the interstate and how his car was impounded later that day after it crashed. This was complete news to her, and this is when she was given back all of his personal belongings. But with all of this information, she was able to report him missing. Logan's uncle, who was a retired Thurston County sheriff, kicked off the search for him, and it was pretty massive and intense. They searched a 2-mile radius around where his car was found, and they specifically focused on the woods alongside the interstate since that's where someone was last seen running into. Authorities brought in cadaver dogs, and they searched by land and air, but absolutely no trace of Logan was ever found. It was like he vanished into thin air. It wasn't until after his disappearance gained some traction on the news that more witnesses came forward, but what they said only adds more mystery to this case. On the morning of May 20th, a witness said that she saw Logan with 2 white men standing at the back of his car. It was parked on the right shoulder of the interstate near where it would eventually be found. She said that as she was coming home that night, she saw his car in the exact same location, only this time the hood was up and no one was there. At this point in time, it didn't look like the car had crashed yet, which is bizarre because others reported that earlier that day is when it did in fact crash. She described one of the men with Logan that day as around 6 feet tall, had blonde hair and a bowl cut, and was wearing a tank top with jean shorts that were too small for him. The other guy she described as having shoulder-length blonde hair and was wearing a flannel with jeans. Authorities later released a sketch of what one of the men may have looked like, but as of today, their identity remains a mystery. Adding to the creepiness of this case is the fact that later that night, the same night that Logan's car was found, there were sightings of a naked teenager in the area, but again, nobody knows who this was, and it was never really investigated. So police started combing through Logan's phone records, which showed him traveling on I-5 heading south that morning, but then for reasons unknown, he turns around and heads back for a little bit before turning back around, eventually stopping where his car was found. Nobody knows if Logan was even in the car that day with his phone, or if it was stolen, and it's just odd that someone who very obviously does not match his description was seen in the passenger seat. Who was that, and what was he doing? It doesn't make sense to me that multiple different people said that it appeared that no one was driving the car. That is so bizarre to me. Police also discovered that just days before he disappeared, Logan texted a woman that he met on a dating app saying, quote, "I hope I survive this week." End quote. Why he said that, no one knows. As of today, Logan remains missing, but there are a few theories as to what could have happened to him. One theory is that he suffered some sort of mental breakdown after smoking. According to his grandma, she knew that at this time Logan had been smoking and it wasn't anything crazy, but she did worry about him doing this because it seemed to make him a little paranoid at night. He was also going through some personal things, like not really knowing what to do with his life. Logan was a really popular kid who attended Tumwater High School. He was a model student and a star athlete on the football team that everyone loved, but at the end of his senior year, Logan was at a party where a girl made racist remarks to him, and none of his friends stuck up for him, which really hurt him. It affected him so much that he completely cut off his entire friend group, and he made a last-minute decision to enroll at WSU in Pullman, which is over 300 miles away. He went there for a year before deciding to move back in with his grandma and sister in Tumwater. He worked a couple of jobs and stayed relatively busy. Some believe that with all of these sudden changes in his life, mixed with him smoking, that he had some sort of mental break, which caused him to tell his grandma that he had an epiphany that morning. And while this might make sense, it still doesn't explain where he is, or why so many different people saw someone that wasn't Logan driving his car that day. The descriptions are just so far off from what Logan looked like, and it wasn't just one person that saw this, it was multiple people, and it was in broad daylight. Another theory is that Logan's sister's boyfriend might have had something to do with his disappearance. Her boyfriend had recently moved into the home with them, and Logan and him reportedly didn't get along. Logan's other family members recall him saying that this boyfriend was a problem, but he wouldn't elaborate more, saying that it seemed like Logan was scared to talk about it. This boyfriend does have a criminal history, but after taking a polygraph and passing, police ruled him out as a suspect. Logan's family has since hired a private investigator, but no trace of Logan has ever been found. Unfortunately, the situation was not handled properly, and since his car was impounded that day, it was never processed by a crime lab, so all potential evidence was either lost or unusable. This is one of the most bizarre cases that I've ever heard of, and it is still unsolved. The fact that so many people go missing after crashing their car is so scary to me. I would do anything to find out what actually happened to them. Whatever happened to Logan that day remains a mystery 8 years later.
You ever heard about a woman named Gabriela Rico Jimenez?
Nah, never.
Alright, on August 3rd, 2009, there was a woman captured on camera outside a hotel in Monterrey. She was like screaming to like random people in the crowd and to police officers, saying stuff about cannibalism, a secret society, that she wants her freedom.
Nah, this sounds trippy as fuck already.
After that, she was arrested, and then every single news stations were covering this. A lot of people thought they were just like some random lady was just having like a manic episode. But what people found weird about this was the fact that Gabriella was a supermodel before. They remember her being on magazines. She wasn't obviously like as famous as Beyonce or whatever, but she did have a name for herself.
She was known.
After this situation, she was never seen or heard of again, and her entire career as a supermodel on the internet
was deleted.
Purposely erased everything about her because they're trying to make us forget who she was. So if you search up her name, nothing's gonna pop up besides this specific video.
It's kind of weird the fact that she said all those things and was never heard from again. It makes what she said a little more like, if she was just some random ass crackhead, bro,
why would they decide to cover it? Because a lot of people could just have manic episodes and say that shit.
She didn't do no crime, bro. She was just being fucking crazy in the street.
Another theory that somebody said that I saw like in the comments, maybe she wasn't a known model. Maybe she was.
Am I the only one that thinks the timing of these drones is suspicious? In my mind, the drones that are being seen over New Jersey are a total distraction. I mean, what bizarre timing. The people in the United States finally start coming together and gaining a sort of class consciousness, talking constantly on all social media about how evil the rich ruling class is. And then immediately, literally immediately, gigantic drones are seen flying throughout New Jersey. And just recently, today, I believe it was one of the top intelligence officials at the FBI stated that they didn't know what these drones were. Now, that's a complete and utter lie. They already definitely know what these things are. And I'd be willing to put my money on the fact that the United States government is the one sending these drones into the sky. And if you think that that theory is a little bit absurd, it's not, I promise you. Why don't you tell me, whatever happened to those weather balloon UAPs that were seen last year? Remember that whole thing where there were these unidentified objects flying over lakes, and government officials were going on the record saying we need answers about all this and what exactly these things are? Well, let me remind you, we never actually got any of those answers. Literally, to this day, I have not seen a valid explanation as to what those weather balloon UAP things were last year. But they did just so happen to come into the national spotlight around the same time that some of the Epstein documents and files were finally being released. So I'm going to let you decide on this one. Do you think that aliens or foreign agents are suddenly sending these drones into United States airspace where they're actually not even doing anything? They literally just seem to be flying around, causing a ruckus, scaring people. Or do you think that that sort of thing is coming from inside the United States government because they would rather have your mind on something like a UFO invasion or aliens instead of class consciousness and coming together against the ruling billionaire elite? Those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below.
These are videos with the most haunting backstories, and this series is going to be crazy. This is security footage of Luka Magnotta kidnapping a man named Jung Lin before making the infamous one lunatic, one ice pick video. He tied him to a bed and then with an ice pick he stabbed Jung Lin until he died. After he died, Luka did the following. He cut his head, legs, and arms off and then started sexually abusing the body. He stuck a bottle inside of Jung Lin's body and even ate his flesh, and also fed the flesh to the dog in the room. You also see him take Jung Lin's body parts to the garbage can in the video too, which is right here. Luka Magnotta then mailed Jung Lin's hands and feet to elementary schools and federal political party offices. And after a video depicting the murder was posted online, which I explained on this channel in detail, Luka Magnotta fled Canada, becoming the subject of an Interpol red notice and prompting an international manhunt. In 2012, he was arrested in an internet cafe in Berlin while searching himself up on the internet. The video that Luka posted of him committing the murder is just awful and inhumane. This man was obsessed with being famous and did anything to do so. He wanted to become a serial killer, but he got caught before he could carry out any more gruesome murders like this. I don't recommend searching for this video at all, especially if you've seen my video explaining it already. But if you're interested in this case, there is a Netflix documentary called Don't F With Cats that explains the case start to finish, and I highly recommend watching that instead of the one lunatic, one ice pick video. This footage is just so haunting because Jung Lin thought he was going to have a fun night with the stranger he just met, but instead it turned into a living nightmare. And what's even more sinister is that this wasn't a random murder. Luka planned this before Jung Lin even arrived at the place he was staying at.
The child who was kidnapped 73 years ago was just found alive. It was the 21st of February 1951. Louis Armando Albino was just 6 years old. He'd been innocently playing in a park in West Oakland, California. Him and his older brother, Roger, were just playing in the park when something hideous happened. The pair were approached by a random woman with her face covered. Roger said that he just turned his back for 1 second and then suddenly his brother was gone. He'd been snatched by the woman. Now, Louis's family was understandably devastated. It was a completely different time back then, and they had thought that their son was safe to just play in the park in the middle of the day. They had no idea what this masked woman had in store for their son. Meanwhile, Louis was flown to the East Coast. He was given to a new family to just start a new life with them. His actual family back home was sick with worry. The FBI even got involved to try and hunt for the missing child. The local army were even drafted in to help with the search, but unfortunately they found absolutely nothing. Throughout her life, Louis's mum never gave up hope. She regularly called the police to ask for updates right until her death in 2005. Then, many years later in 2020, a woman decided to submit her DNA to an ancestry website. She found out she had an uncle on the East Coast. This sparked a hunt for her long-lost relative. The random DNA submission to a website eventually uncovered the missing boy. The 6-year-old was now nearly 80. 4 days later, missing Louis flew to reunite with his brother Roger and his long-lost family. When they finally saw each other, they embraced. They then had an awful lot of catching up to do. Louis had children and even grandchildren. Now, tragically, just 2 months after this reunion, Roger passed away. It was really bittersweet that the pair had managed to reunite after all of these years.
This is the last known footage of 4-year-old Cash Gernon, who was kidnapped out of a bed that he shared with his twin brother. He would later be found stabbed to death just 8 blocks away. In the early morning hours of May 15th, 2021, footage from a baby monitor shows 18-year-old Darren Brown enter a bedroom shared by 4-year-old twins Cash and Carter. The twins had been staying with a woman named Monica in Dallas, Texas for several months after their dad Trevor reportedly left them there to look for work out of town. Trevor said that he didn't want to disturb their schedule, so he left them with Monica, but after he left, left, he never contacted Monica again. And to make matters worse, the twins' mom had no idea where they were. The baby monitor showed Darren kidnap Cash from his bed, and the moments that follow are horrific. Darren carried Cash, still sleeping, 8 blocks away to a walking trail and proceeded to stab him several times in the chest, killing him. He then brought Cash's body back out to a public street and left him there. His body would be found a few hours later by a woman out on a morning walk, and she said she's never seen anything more horrifying. Cash was just laying there in a pool of blood, and ants were covering the bottoms of his feet. She called 911 and stayed with him until the police arrived, but it was clear he was already gone. Monica slept in that morning, and around 3 hours later, when she realized Cash was gone, she reported him missing to the police. After reviewing the baby monitor footage, Monica said she knew who the suspect was and that Darren lived in the neighborhood and would play with her kids. What's terrifying is that the footage shows Darren coming back 2 hours after kidnapping Cash and hovering over Carter, who was still asleep in his bed, but he abruptly left. At this point, Cash was already dead. Darren was arrested 1 day later and charged with burglary, kidnapping, and capital murder after Cash's blood was found on his clothing. It's not clear how Darren got into the home or what his motive was, although nothing could justify what was done to little Cash. Darren was reportedly at the home 2 days before the murder. At the time, he already had a misdemeanor and was out of jail on bond. Because of how publicized this case was, Monica's neighbor decided to go through his security footage and found that 2 months before Cash's murder, Darren was creeping around his house. He shares a back alley with Monica, and the video shows Darren opening up the gate to his yard, looking around, and then leaving. That neighbor has kids, so I can't imagine how terrifying that was to see. In 2022, Darren was found incompetent to stand trial after he was mentally evaluated by a psychologist and a psychiatrist. A third medical expert also deemed him unfit to stand trial. His attorney stated that he was in a trance-like state at the time of the murder and suffers from hallucinations due to being schizophrenic. So instead of jail time, he was transferred to Vernon Psychiatric Hospital. Since the murder, Cash's dad Trevor has released a statement on YouTube basically explaining why he left the boys with Monica. He said he knew Monica for years and went to go look for work out of town and just didn't want to bother the boys. But like I said earlier, he never once contacted Monica after he left. He never mentioned the boys' mom and didn't clarify why he never left the boys with family instead, as their mom's family had been looking for them for several months. Cash was let down by so many people. This is a story that will never leave my mind, especially as a parent.
This woman killed her husband and then cooked and fed his body to his kids. On February 29, 2000, in the town of Aberdeen, New South Wales, Catherine Knight murdered her partner John Price. Before the murder, Knight and Price had a relationship marked by domestic violence. Price had taken out a restraining order against Knight, but he later allowed her back into his life. The details of this crime are extremely disturbing, and I'm about to explain it to you right now. In February 2000, a series of assaults on Price culminated with Catherine Knight stabbing him in the chest. Finally fed up, he kicked her out of the house, and on February 28th, John Price stopped at the court on his way to work and took out a restraining order in an attempt to keep her away from both himself and his children. That afternoon, Price told his co-workers that if he did not come to work the next day, it would be because Knight had murdered him. Despite their pleas that Price should not return home, he stated that he was afraid Knight would kill his children if he did not. At 6 a.m. the next day, a neighbor became worried when Price's car was still in the driveway. And when he did not arrive at work, his employer sent a worker to see what was wrong. Both the neighbor and the worker tried knocking on Price's bedroom window to wake him, but they alerted police after noticing blood on the front door. Breaking down the back door, police found Price's body with Knight completely passed out from taking a large number of pills. She had stabbed Price with a butcher's knife while he was sleeping, and according to the blood evidence, he awoke and tried to turn the light on before attempting to escape while Catherine Knight chased him through the house. He managed to open the front door and get outside, but he either stumbled back inside or was dragged back into the hallway, where he finally died after bleeding out. Later, Catherine Knight went to the ATM and withdrew $1,000 from Price's account. Price's autopsy revealed that he had been stabbed at least 37 times in both the front and back of his body, with many of the wounds extending into vital organs. Several hours after Price died, Catherine Knight skinned him and hung the skin from a meat hook on the door to the laundry room. She then decapitated Price and cooked parts of his body, serving up the meat with baked potatoes, carrots, pumpkin, and many other things at the dinner table, along with notes beside each plate, each having the name of one of Price's children on it. Catherine Knight was preparing to serve his body parts to his children. Catherine Knight was arrested and charged with the murder of John Price. On November 8, 2001, Justice O'Keefe pointed out that the nature of the crime and Knight's lack of remorse required a severe penalty. He sentenced her to life in prison, refused to fix a non-parole period, and ordered that her papers would be marked as definitely never to be released, which is the first time this has been imposed on a woman in the Australian history. It's worth saying that photos of the crime scene and photos of the meal she cooked are on the internet, but I don't recommend looking for them. This case is just absolutely sickening, and how can someone do this to their own husband?
Okay, another thought about these drones. Shouldn't we be shooting them fucking down? Like, honestly, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, I really don't get it. If these drones are like completely unidentified aircraft that the United States government has no idea what they are, why the fuck aren't they shooting one of them down to analyze what the hell they are? I mean, these are like SUV-sized drones following United States Navy ships, disturbing radio signals, like changing. I've seen reports of the clocks in cars being changed when they drove underneath these drones. So obviously these things are like highly technologically advanced. And there's like hundreds of them that people keep seeing every single day. So why the hell aren't we shooting one of them down and taking a look at what the fuck it is? I mean, it's just kind of absurd that they really want us to believe that they have no idea what these things are, but they're not shooting one of them down to take a look at what they are. And that just screams to me that this is an inside job, that these drones are coming from the United States, because otherwise one of them would have been shot down. I mean, let's say that these are completely unidentified aircraft that are flying over major cities and swarming Navy ships. Wouldn't that be like a massive fucking security threat? Like, these things could have bombs on them, they could have weapons, they could even have bioweapons. And they're just like not giving a shit. I don't know, it just reeks of inside job, of distraction, if you know what I'm saying. And it's funny that they think people are just gonna buy into this shit again.
I want to give a viewer discretion. This case is really graphic. I'm not going to get too into detail. Regardless, what happened was sad as there was two girls, Louisa Jesperson and Maren Yulin. They were very good friends, and they both attended the University of Southeastern Norway. And in 2018 of December, Louisa told Maren she wanted to go to Morocco to go hiking and stuff. But before the trip, Louisa, she had made a Facebook post about wanting to go. And she had said, "Dear friends, I'm going to Morocco in December. Any of you guys who's around by then, or any mountain friends who know something about Mount Toubkal." And they go up the mountain. They eventually ended up stopping at a certain area because they got tired. They wanted to rest, so they put up their tent. And during that time, people say that killers were stalking them, and they were just waiting for an opportunity for them to attack, which they did. They go in with a machete. First girl, Louisa, she's beheaded, and then the same thing happened to the other girl. But what made this whole thing up was that one of the guys was recording it.
Bro, stop
I don't have the video. I did not search it up, bro, so you don't have to worry about that. They put both heads in the tent, and that's it. A week before the murder, they had posted a video on the internet pledging their allegiance to ISIS, and they were saying how they were planning to do a terrorist attack on either security services or foreign tourists around the area.
Bruh, so
they were already planning this shit ahead. The crazy part is that they did get arrested. They did get the death penalty acquainted to them, but they have not been executed yet. They're still alive.
After people had been vanishing in Toronto, police were closing in on a serial killer. When they finally swarmed a property, they found a 9th victim tied up with a bag over their head. Was he alive or not? This is the terrifying case of the Santa serial killer. During Pride Festival in Canada in 2017, Andrew Kinsman disappeared. He was the 8th man to disappear from the local area. Locals were terrified, understandably, that a serial killer might be on the loose. 7 years earlier, in 2010, within 4 months, 2 gay men vanished from the neighbourhood of Church and Wellesley. Now, this was actually the gay village of Toronto. 18 months later, another disappeared. Interestingly, all 3 were middle-aged immigrants. Police very early on received an anonymous tip linking the men to a man called Bruce. Despite this, though, police felt that they had their hands tied. They had nothing really to go off other than the fact that there was this man out there called Bruce. Then in 2012, police in Toronto received another disturbing tip. This time the caller said that a cannibal was on the prowl in the area. It was discovered that someone was posting on really disturbing underground websites claiming to have eaten brown flesh. Now, investigators actually managed to trace the person that had been posting this online. They linked the post to an email address from someone claiming that they were a silver fox. Now, this email was traced back to a man named Bruce Arthur. Bruce was a shopping mall Santa Claus. He'd also worked as a gardener previously, and that is going to be very significant later on in the case. No one had any idea of Bruce's dark past. He'd had a troubled childhood, being raised by a very violent alcoholic father. Now, Bruce was actually a gay man, but was forced to hide his sexuality due to his religious upbringing. He ended up marrying a woman called Janice Campbell, who was his high school girlfriend. However, behind the scenes, he was wrestling with his true sexuality. He secretly had affairs behind his wife's back with men. When Janice discovered this, she was obviously heartbroken and divorced Bruce. No one could guess the horrors that were about to unfold. Frustratingly, when officers interviewed Bruce, they said that they found him to be cooperative, helpful, and really friendly, so they just let him go. They said they had no evidence to link him to any of the disappearances. However, more men began vanishing. The total rose to 8 men, and Bruce's final victim would be the one to lead him to police. When officers entered Andrew Kinsman's apartment, they were looking for clues. Was there anything inside the apartment that indicated where he was planning on going? Luckily for investigators, he was a very organised man and had kept a log of his plans each day. On his calendar, he documented that the day he vanished, he had an appointment at 3 p.m. with someone called Bruce. Obviously, this was extremely significant. Did they finally have enough evidence to arrest Bruce with a crime? They scoured the CCTV of the local area and managed to capture images of Andrew getting into a red van prior to disappearing. Police were able to track the vehicle and actually found it at a wrecking yard, still intact. They examined the car for forensic evidence and actually found blood inside the vehicle. They sent it off for testing, and lo and behold, it came back as a match to Andrew. So they then went back to Bruce and seized his computer. If they'd done this originally, it may have actually saved victims. On the computer were extremely disturbing images. All of the men that had vanished had been killed, put into positions, and photographed. Police knew they had their killer, but they couldn't celebrate yet. The race was on to try and catch him red-handed and apprehend him before he could take any more victims. They placed him under 24-hour surveillance. The surveillance officers had instructions to arrest him if they saw him with anyone else. Suddenly, on a snowy morning on the 18th of January 2018, 66-year-old Bruce was captured on surveillance, walking into his apartment with a young man. In a dramatic turn of events, police swarmed Bruce's house. By the time they entered, the man he was seen with was already tied up in Bruce's bedroom with a bag over his head. If they had been any later, he would have been Bruce's 9th victim. But there was another horrific fact that officers were about to uncover. While working as a gardener, Bruce had placed large plant pots in a customer's garden. Cadaver dogs alerted police to these and found inside body parts. Bruce was given life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. He will be 91 when he is eligible.
Do 11 family members under 3 generations all agree to end their own lives at the same time as part of a ritual mass suicide, in an extremely brutal way at that? That's what happened to the Badia family, and psychologists say it was a result of shared psychosis. But others, including their extended family, believe that they were all murdered and that this was a huge cover-up. This is probably one of the most disturbing things that I have ever read about, so let's talk about it. The Badia family was super close-knit, and the main 11 family members had lived in a 3-story house in North Delhi's Barari neighborhood for 20 years. They owned 2 shops, one of which was on the first floor of their house, and the other was a plywood shop not much further away. They were all highly educated and really loved by the community. In 2007, the patriarch of the family, which was Lalit's dad, unexpectedly passed away. This is when Lalit's behavior completely shifted, and his once extroverted, caring personality soon became very controlling and quiet, and he very slowly began isolating the rest of his family from the outside world. But after his dad died, he became the leader of the family, especially financially, so whatever he said, everyone pretty much followed without question. He was really smart and considered wise beyond his years. But one day out of the blue, Lalit told his family that he was possessed with his late dad's soul, and he said that his dad was giving him instructions on how to attain a good life. When his dad's spirit would enter his body, his family said that his voice would change to sound exactly like his father. Lalit would instruct his family family on how to behave, and 2 of his family members were so influenced by him that they began writing in diaries every single day. And based on the entries, it truly seemed like they 100% believed that Lalit was possessed with his late dad's spirit. Nobody in the community knew what was going on behind closed doors though, and nobody knew the tragedy that was about to take place. On the morning of July 1st, 2018, a neighbor of the Badia family went to meet Lalit for their regular morning walk, but Lalit was nowhere to be found, and both of his shops were still closed, which was odd because they would usually open up at 5:30 every morning. And at this point, there was a line of people gathering outside the store. So the neighbor walked up to the family's house and sees that the front door is slightly ajar. When he enters, he walks up the first set of stairs and finds an extremely gruesome scene. 10 of the Badia family members, including Lalit, were all dead, hanging from an iron railing in the courtyard of the house. They had all been blindfolded and they were gagged with a wet cloth which was held in by duct tape, and most of them had their hands and feet tied behind their backs. They were hanging in batches of 3 and they all had cotton balls shoved into their ears. And even scarier was the fact that all of their faces had been tightly wrapped in a bedsheet. Sitting on the floor near them were 5 stools. Laying on the floor in the next room was their grandma, and she was dead as well, but she had been strangled. If you can imagine, this was a really horrifying scene as the neighbor literally found the entire family dead. And what's really sad is that the ages of the deceased were between 15 and 85. The only survivor of this entire family was their pet dog, who had been chained on the roof to the same bar that the family was found hanging from. When he was found, he had a really high fever, and I can only imagine what he went through seeing his entire family die like that and not being able to help. So needless to say, the police were called, and when they arrived to the scene, they initially thought the Badia family was murdered. I mean, why else would their hands and feet be tied together, and why would they all be blindfolded like that? And the grandma had been strangled, so this seemed to be a clear case of foul play. But then authorities started combing the house for evidence, and this is when they found 11 diaries that had been written in over the past 11 years. More specifically, the family began writing in these diaries in 2007, the same year that Lalit's dad died, and the same year that he became possessed with his dad's spirit. In these diaries, the family detailed exactly how they were found at the crime scene. They wrote how all 10 members of the family would have their hands and legs tied together. Their faces would be covered and they would be gagged, and their ears would be stuffed with cotton balls. They wrote about how they would hang in batches of 3, and they even wrote how the grandma was too old to hang, so she would be strangled instead in the next room. One entry read, quote, "Everyone will tie their own hands, and when the ritual is done, everyone will help each other untie themselves," end quote. At this point, authorities had no idea what was going on because the diaries detailed the exact crime scene, and they questioned whether or not the family wrote them or if someone else did. A handwriting analysis was done, and it was confirmed that the diaries were written by 2 family members, Priyanka and Neetu. They wrote down everything Lalit instructed when he was possessed with his dad's spirit. So then police started looking for any other significant clues in the house to point to what the heck was going on and why these diary entries were written by the family. Police then found evidence the family had been participating in a ritual for the last 8 days of their life. And this was backed up by the last journal entries, which talked about witchcraft and occult practices. These entries are literally terrifying, and they were written every single day and almost seemed conversational. Like the family was talking to someone not there, which I guess makes sense considering they thought that Lalit was possessed by his late dad. Authorities found no evidence of a robbery or any signs of a struggle, and when they reviewed the CCTV footage from a nearby business that showed the Badia's house, it showed no one entering the house other than the family. But I will say this footage is really creepy to me because it shows the family carrying in the 5 stools found at the scene as well as the wire that they were found hanging from and tied up in. It's really creepy to me because it shows them literally setting up and planning their own demise, and whether they knew it at the time or not is the main question. So multiple people spoke with the family on the night of their deaths, and not one single person noticed anything odd. The family didn't say anything out of the ordinary, and they even said that they would all talk in the morning. After reading every diary entry, police discovered that the family was performing a ritual of a symbolic representation of a banyan tree, and in the diary it said that they had to behave like the roots hanging from the tree, which is really eerie because the police described the scene of them hanging as exactly like a tree. Before they hung themselves, they placed a bucket of water near them, and it was believed by them that the water would change color when the ritual was done. And based on the journal entries, it's believed that Lalit was the mastermind of the entire thing. He got his family to follow him by saying that the soul of his dad had entered his body. Lalit told his family that at the end of the ritual, the spirit of his dad would come back and untie their hands. Based on this evidence, it became clear to authorities that the rest of the family didn't think that they were going to die doing this. They thought that this was just a ritual. It's believed that Lalit was the one to tie everyone up, and police also believed that he was the last to die. During a post-mortem examination on the bodies, authorities found almost no signs of defensive wounds. They even stated that it seemed as though the family was hanging peacefully. Because police couldn't find any evidence to support murder, they eventually ruled the body deaths as a ritual mass suicide motivated by shared psychosis. Shared psychosis is a psychiatric syndrome in which symptoms of a delusional belief are transmitted from one person to another. Police believe that Lalit suffered from some sort of delusional disorder, and unfortunately, since he was the leader of the family, the rest of them kind of just blindly followed. But one thing just doesn't make sense to me, and it's small pieces of evidence that they found when doing the post-mortem examinations. Authorities found that the grandma who was strangled had small injuries, indicating that she could have been held down. One of the older brothers was also found to have a small cut on his knuckle, and when he was found, one of his arms was raised, indicating that he was trying to free himself. And I think this is the saddest detail of all, but the youngest child had partially swallowed the towel that was in their mouth. It's not clear if this was accidental or if it was forced down their throat like that. All of this evidence was so minor that authorities couldn't prove whether this was indeed a mass suicide or if it was maybe forced at the hands of Lalit. If this truly was just a ritual and none of them expected to die, why was the grandma strangled to death first? To me, that shows ill intentions. Some think that the reason they were all blindfolded and had their ears plugged was so that they couldn't hear or see the others before them struggling and dying. The kids were found to be tied tighter than anyone else, almost as if they were not intended to escape. Some extended family believes that the entire family was murdered and this was a huge cover-up. And their main reasoning is that if Lalit was truly responsible, his hands wouldn't have been tied too. Despite major backlash and public outcry, police have stuck with their original ruling that this was a ritual mass suicide as a result of shared psychosis. But to this day, so many questions remain unanswered, such as how 11 different people over 3 generations all agreed to end their own lives, and why no one questioned Lalit. Another major question is how not one single person told anyone outside of the family. You would think that the younger kids would tell their friends or something, but not one single person said a word of what they had planned. It's now been 6 years, and whatever happened to the Badia family that summer night remains a mystery.
However, according to the phrase, you can't make this stuff up, might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Scary things experienced by night shift workers. Anonymous said that he used to work as a graveyard custodian in a building by himself. Now when he started, he was told that the building was very weird and that he should stay on his toes. He called bull, but after working there a year, he was pretty convinced that something weird was going on. He was riding the elevator to a different floor, but instead of going to that floor, it went straight to the basement. The doors open and all of the sudden, a dark figure starts walking towards the elevator and he freaks out. He hit the doors to close and the figure just kept getting closer. He ended up standing outside of the building for a half an hour or so while the police searched the basement. What really freaked them out was that the one entrance into the basement was locked and barred, and they didn't find anyone down there after searching everywhere.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. Part 18. A man from Queens once spent 5 months in jail completely unaware that his bail was just $2. Since spiders molt, when you see what you might think is a dead spider, it could just be that the spider left behind its exoskeleton and is now bigger than before. Dr. Seuss cheated on his wife while she had cancer and then she proceeded to commit suicide. Almost everyone on Earth is walking around with a bunch of poop inside of them. Scientists accidentally killed the world's oldest living animal, which was a clam that lived to be 507 years old. Statistically speaking, at least one person who comments on this video will not be alive tomorrow. The real reason you shouldn't eat raw cookie dough isn't because of getting sick from eating raw eggs. It's because you shouldn't eat raw flour, which contains fecal matter from all the birds flying over the field and pooping on the wheat. Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. Part 19. Facebook was forced to shut down 2 artificial intelligence robots named Alice and Bob because they started communicating with one another in their own language. If you ever win the lottery, you're 120 times more likely to be killed by an immediate family member. A sloth has nipples in its armpits. In the 17th century, there was a man named Tarre who could eat his entire body weight in just one sitting. And despite being pretty skinny, he would swallow live animals, eat human corpses, and was even accused of eating the body of a 3-year-old toddler. An 11-year-old boy named Konorak escaped Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment but was later returned to Dahmer by police, and he killed the boy just 30 minutes after. It's commonly believed in religion that angels look like this, but according to the Bible, they actually look like this.
After the massacre at Higgins Haven, the body of serial killer Jason Voorhees was taken to the Wessex County morgue. Despite being hit in the head with an axe, Jason woke up and killed both the coroner and a nurse. He left the morgue and headed back to Crystal Lake. Conveniently, a fresh group of teenagers were making their way to Camp Crystal Lake on a weekend getaway. They spotted a hitchhiker on their way but didn't have any room in the car. Soon after they drove past, the hitchhiker was stabbed in the neck and killed by Jason. Upon their arrival at Crystal Lake, the teens had a party, as you do, which naturally didn't go down well with Jason. He then proceeded to kill Samantha, Paul, Terry, Mrs. Jarvis, Jimmy, Tina, Ted, Doug, Sarah and Rob. There's Rob there, bottom right. A showdown between Tommy, Jason and Trish led to Tommy shaving his head, in the hope that Jason would think it was himself as a child and confuse him. It did. Trish hit Jason and his mask fell off. Tommy then drove a machete through his skull. Surely that was the end of Jason. This is Patrick David McKay, better known as the Devil's Disciple and the Psychopath. A victim of childhood abuse, McKay was frequently beaten by his father, an alcoholic suffering from PTSD after the Vietnam War. When his father died of a heart attack, McKay couldn't handle it. He went into an extreme state of denial. He was sent to various borstals and prisons during his teenage years, and was removed from the family home 18 times. McKay on each occasion had beaten up his mum and 2 sisters. He went on to torture animals before attempting to kill his mum and auntie. McKay even decorated his flat with Nazi memorabilia. He went on to kill his friend, Father Crean. When arrested, McKay claimed to have killed 11 people in total. Only 3 were confirmed. He's been in prison since November 1975. That's 45 years. My latest podcast episode covers this case and comes out tomorrow if you'd like to hear more about it. The link for the streaming services is in my bio.
I think some people don't realize that the Titanic is almost gone. Like, it has about 30 years before it fully disintegrates. And yes, a lot of this has to do with rusticles and the bacteria that's eating it, but there's also been some human intervention that has not been great for the ship. Sure, there's some that are sightseeing like Ocean Gate, but there is a huge industry for goods that are taken from the Titanic. There have been thousands of items that have been retrieved from the Titanic, and a lot of them go for serious money. This kimono that was rumored to be worn by Lady Duff Gordon as she was escaping the sinking ship went for $75,000. This letter was actually retrieved from a body that was found in the wreckage. And in it he says, "If all goes well, I'll arrive in New York Wednesday morning." This wasn't recovered from the Titanic, but a menu was up for sale. And the most expensive thing to ever be sold was this violin from the group of musicians who were playing as the ship went down. In 2020, a company actually got the rights to cut into the ship in order to retrieve a radio, further damaging the boat. So the conversation for a long time has been, is it worth it to damage the boat in order to retrieve things? But now the conversation is just, is it worth it to go down there at all?
This man killed his neighbor using Pokemon cards. 31-year-old Andrew Haig. And on August 2nd, 2022, he got into a heated argument with his neighbor. This man, 50-year-old Simon Wilkinson. So according to Andrew, on that day, Simon called him a racial slur and used some curse words, and that sent him into a rage. So Andrew then yelled at Simon to come fight me like a man, and when he stepped outside, Andrew began repeatedly attacking him with a bag that contained 5 tins of Pokemon cards. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what these are metal tins that come with booster packs and promo cards inside, but they're really hard and rigid, made out of metal. And I can't imagine someone wailing on you at full strength with a bag full of these. So after hitting him with these Pokemon cards, Simon was on the ground asking for help, and that's when Andrew killed him. Andrew repeatedly punched and stomped on Simon's body, and then retrieved a plank of wood and beat him to a pulp, which effectively killed him. So Andrew, as it turns out, had been diagnosed in the past with schizophrenia and had stopped taking his medication only a short time before this assault happened. And just this year, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 17 years.
So this next story comes in from one of our YouTube followers, Black Vortex Storm Chasers. My uncle told me a story about an incident that happened to him when he was around 17 years old. He lived in a small town in the Texas Panhandle, and he had a bedroom in the back of the house. On this particular night, he had gone to bed, but was having trouble getting to sleep. He was laying in bed, tossing and turning. Eventually he fell asleep, but he kept waking up because he was feeling like there was someone in his room. He got up a few times and turned on the light, but didn't see anyone. He said he finally shrugged it off and he blamed it on the Texas heat. He finally got comfortable again to doze off when he suddenly was woken up to someone violently pulling at his feet. He said that they were trying to pull him off the bed. He tried to scream, but he couldn't open his mouth because nothing would come out. He held onto his headboard, trying not to be pulled off his bed. He said all he could do was hold on. He then started to pray with all his might, and as soon as he did, it just stopped. It stopped as fast as it started. He jumped out of bed, turned on the light, and as he ran out the room to his mom's room, he told her what happened. That's when they noticed deep bruising around his ankles. His mom told him to pray because it could have been a demon sent by the devil himself to collect him. Needless to say, he never slept in that room again.
Disneyland doesn't want you to know about the Disney Dark Ages. This is a period of time at the Disney parks known for having the worst ride malfunctions and bloodiest accidents in the park's history. It cost the park millions, it was absolutely the park's fault for it happening, and it's what tonight's episode is going to be all about. Basically, during this era, Disney said, hey, we're not going to pay to maintain the rides anymore, we're just going to fix them as accidents arise. They felt like it was costing them too much money to continually maintain the rides for safety, so they cut all of the maintenance. They even cut having people on site to make sure that people's seatbelts were fastened properly. Instead, they just had a few maintenance teams that operated at night that would fix the rides that had issues during that day. And this was a horrible idea. For instance, the teacups weren't maintained at all until an 11-year-old boy was flung from them and broke his vertebrae. And no one bothered to check Space Mountain to make sure it was functioning properly until a wheel fell off the coaster and 9 people got hurt. And as these accidents are arising, there's actually a rule in the park that attendants can't call 911. So there were all of these horrible accidents happening all the time, and no one was able to call the paramedics. Instead, they had to call Disney Services, who would in turn call the Anaheim Fire Department. There's obviously a lot more to this story, and I'm going to tell more of them here eventually, but tonight's episode is going to be a deep dive into all of this.
The woman you just saw in that video, 21-year-old TikTok star Carla Pardini, was found dead last year. She had been gunned down outside of her home after receiving an eerie phone call. So before she was murdered, Carla was growing an audience here on TikTok, and she lived in the city of Culiacan in the state of Sinaloa in Mexico. So according to Carla's own mother, on the night of September 20th, 2022, Carla was inside of her home when she received a mysterious phone call from a stranger telling her to step outside. Carla then stepped outside of her home, and that's when the shooting occurred. The next day, Carla's body was discovered at an intersection in her neighborhood, and she had been shot multiple times, which led to her death. So witnesses who saw this happen actually claimed that there were multiple armed men in the area when she was murdered, which means that Carla was ambushed by some sort of group. Prosecutors and investigators in Mexico also stated that they were working on this case in secrecy as to not alert the perpetrators. But unfortunately, till this day, no arrest has been made in this case, and Carla's murder has gone unsolved. Some people have claimed that her murder has something to do with that chilling final video that she posted on TikTok. But who killed her remains a mystery.
Part 3 of the Lola James case. Kyle Bevan and Sinead James were sentenced yesterday on the 25th of April 2023. During their trial, Lola's grandmother addressed Kyle and said, "Look at me, Kyle. You haven't just taken away Lola from our family. You've also taken away the happy childhood that her sisters should have had." She recalled how her cheeky monkey granddaughter loved nothing more than the outdoors and was happiest when she was caked in mud, playing in her shorts and wellies. She said that she blames herself and feels a lot of guilt for not spotting the signs, and she sits outside the house every night talking to Lola and telling her about her day. Mr. Justice Griffiths said that the attack on Lola was a culmination of months of physical child abuse towards Lola. He said, "I am sure Kyle Bevan did this as an exercise of power, an assertion of superiority over the only person he could feel superior to, a helpless child. He has no remorse at all. At the time, he didn't even simulate sadness about Lola's injuries or condition. He was only concerned about himself." On April 25th, 2023, Kyle Bevan was sentenced to life with a minimum of 28 years for the murder of Lola James. Lola's mother, Sinead James, was sentenced to 6 years for allowing the death of her daughter. She'll serve just 3 years of that before being released on licence. She's also lost custody of her other 2 daughters.
This man murdered his wife when she refused to go on a reality TV show. David Trons and Shanti Cooper Trons met on a dating site in 2013. When they met, he told her that he had inherited between $4 and $6 million from his dad. The pair, who lived in Orlando, ended up getting married just 1 year before her tragic death. In April 2018, David claimed that he found his wife deceased in the bath, covered in blood and partially submerged. He initially told emergency responders that his wife had slipped and fallen in the bath. However, the truth of what actually happened is sickening. The pair had been having arguments due to his finances. David had lied to Shanti about his supposed fortune and wanted her to appear on a home renovation show to get some house updates. The show was called Zombie House Flipping, and it was a show where contestants renovate properties into impressive homes. When his wife refused to take part, David was furious. The pair began sleeping apart. David was in the garage and Shanti was in a 1-bedroom studio on the property. After David was ultimately exposed by Shanti for lying about his multi-million-dollar fortune, David saw a way out. He brutally strangled and beat his wife to death in the studio of their home. He tried to stage the scene to make it look like an accidental death. He told police that he had dragged her from the bathtub and carried her to the living room. Emergency responders, however, noted that the pair were both suspiciously dry when they arrived. A medical examiner concluded that her cause of death was blunt force trauma and strangulation. David was arrested and charged with her murder 4 months later. Tragically, Shanti had an 8-year-old son from a prior relationship who is now left without a mother. David was sentenced to life in prison. Neighbors spotted a 1-year-old wandering the streets of Michigan alone. Alarm bells rang. However, they never expected the disturbing events that followed. It was December the 12th, 2016. A 1-year-old boy was spotted wandering around the corner of Plymouth Road and Warwick Street. Concerned neighbours rang the police and an alert was put out on local news. The child's granddad spotted the bulletin and rang police. He confirmed the child's identity and this set off a string of concerning events. 33-year-old Nicole Smith was the child's mum, and it became apparent she was nowhere to be found. She was soon reported missing. She was last seen the day prior on the corner of Long Acre and Chicago Street in Detroit. That day she was due to meet a family member at 5 p.m. but never turned up. The family member went to her house and she wasn't there. However, he did see footprints by the drive leading to where the car would have been, and he presumed she just popped out. Now, Nicole had 4 children and they were living in transitional housing prior to her disappearance. Worryingly, she told her friends the day before that she was due to meet a man that she'd met on Facebook. It was unclear whether this mystery man had anything to do with her vanishing, but her family just knew that it was very unusual for her to disappear without her kids. It would eventually be years before any light was shone on this case. Nicole's ex-boyfriend, Robert Autry, was found to be using Nicole's bridge card. Now, this is apparently a card that you can use to purchase food from certain shops. He was arrested and charged with Nicole's murder. However, frustratingly, police did not have enough evidence to convict him. Later though, Robert was actually charged on suspicion of SA. He actually confessed to killing Nicole at this point. He even told police where they could find her remains. He led police to an abandoned apartment in Detroit's West Side. As expected, Nicole's body was found there. He pleaded guilty to her murder and will likely be behind bars for life.
Part 2 of the Lola James case. Trigger warning, her injuries are listed and they're quite hard to listen to. Just after Kyle Bevan's mother called 999, they also received a call from Sinead.
She's fallen down the stairs, she has. Right, okay. From the top of the stairs to the bottom, and her whole head's all swollen, and she bit the top of her tongue off or something.
Okay. So, just to confirm, is she conscious?
Is she conscious? I don't even know. Yeah, she's conscious. She's breathing and everything. Just sleeping. Can you go sit with her, please?
So does she wake up when you try and wake her?
She like moves when I try to wake up. Her eyes are all swollen and all.
What caused the fall?
This bloody dog that I had, it barged her and she just fell.
Okay. Is there any serious bleeding?
Kyla's very serious bleeding. Is there any serious bleeding? No.
Okay.
It's just bruising in her head or so in her eyes.
Okay, so stay on the line and tell her exactly what to do next. Do not move her unless she's in danger, and do not splint any injuries. Can I take her name?
Yeah, it's Lola James.
Paramedics arrived at the house after just 5 minutes, and Lola was taken to Withybush Hospital, where Kyle became really aggressive and defensive when doctors were asking questions about Lola's injuries. Lola was then transferred to University Hospital Wales in Cardiff, and while she was laying in a hospital bed fighting for her life, Kyle messaged Sinead asking what she was going to tell the police. Sinead and Kyle were both arrested, and on July 21st, 2020, at 1:18 p.m, Lola James passed away due to her catastrophic brain injury. One doctor who examined Lola said she was the most battered and bruised child she'd ever seen during her long career. These are just some of the injuries. Multiple bruises on her forehead, scalp and around her eyes, 2 cuts near her right eye, hemorrhages to the upper part of her neck and back of her skull, 3 puncture wounds on her forehead, swollen lips, bruising along her cheekbone, hemorrhages on left cheek and temple, bruising on her nose, dark red bruising on her jawline, scratches all over her cheek, chin and neck, bruising on her neck and ears, bruised shoulders, abrasions on her back possibly caused by a weapon, extensive bruising on her back, extensive bruising to her thighs, groin and pelvis, bruising to her knees and lower legs, bruising on her chest, bruising on her arms and hands. There wasn't one part of Lola's tiny body that wasn't bruised, and she sustained 101 injuries in total. Lola had been hit so hard by Kyle that it caused subdural bleeding in her skull, and she'd then been shaken so violently that she lost consciousness and died as a result of brain damage. Sinead and Kyle were both sentenced yesterday on 25th of April 2023, so please go to part 3 for details of the sentencing. This is 2-year-old Lola James. Lola never made it to her 3rd birthday. Her life was cut short by a monster that her mother allowed into their home just days after meeting him online. Kyle Bevan was a self-confessed spicehead. He regularly used amphetamines, Xanax, Valium and cannabis. Sinead James, a mother of 3, already had social services involved as she was a previous victim of domestic abuse. She'd had a social services visit in February 2020, and they did raise concerns about the filthy conditions of the house. As you can see, these aren't living conditions for 3 children, and social services did raise concerns, but never did a follow-up visit. Sinead had been warned by the local authority not to invite any adults into the house if she didn't know them well, or if they were involved with drug or alcohol abuse. Yet Kyle moved in February 2020, despite having only met him just days before. Kyle has a daughter, and Sinead had actually been warned over Facebook Messenger by his child's grandmother that he was a child protection risk and shouldn't be around her children. Yet she still allowed him into the house and left him alone with Lola on multiple occasions. On the 9th of July 2020, while she was in Kyle's care, Lola sustained an injury to the bridge of her nose. It also caused her eyes to swell up, and Kyle's story was that she'd fallen off the sofa because she was knocked by the dog, and she'd fallen onto the coffee table. Sinead bought this story, and no more questions were asked. Just a week later, Lola was murdered. On July 16th, 2020, Sinead went to bed and left Lola and Kyle downstairs by themselves. Just after midnight, she woke up to a loud bang and a scream from Lola. She went into Lola's bedroom and found Kyle with Lola on his knee. He said that she'd banged her head and that he was dealing with it, and after being told, "I've got this," she went back to bed. At 4:26 a.m, Kyle is said to have taken a picture of some injuries on Lola's back, and then just 2 hours later, he sent a disturbing video to his mother showing him trying to prop Lola up. She was severely injured at this point, and he was holding her up and then letting her drop to the floor. He said, "No, she's gone." At 7:20 a.m, Sinead was woken up by Kyle, who said that Lola had fallen down the stairs. He held out his finger, and it had the tip of Lola's tongue on the end that she'd bitten off. 8 minutes later, Kyle phones his mother and asks her to phone an ambulance.
A 2-year-old, she's got ADHD. She's fallen from top to bottom of the stairs. They can't wake her up, and then she's bit the end of her tongue because they're not sure if she's fitted. But she's floppy, they can't wake her up.
Please go to part 2. There'll be a trigger warning at the beginning because Lola's injuries are quite hard to listen to.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
Some are calling this the most horrific fraternity hazing ever in the United States. This is how one night at university can destroy your life forever. Danny Santulli was 18 years old and a freshman at the Uni of Missouri. In October 2021, Danny was captured on CCTV being blindfolded and led downstairs in an event named Pledge Dad Reveal Night. Danny was made to drink a litre of straight vodka by himself. At around 10:55, Danny collapsed and some of the frat members were seen carrying him to a sofa. Around midnight, Danny was captured on cameras sliding off the sofa, and shortly after he was found unconscious with blue lips. Shockingly, instead of calling an ambulance for Danny, the frat members piled him into a car, dropping him on the way. They drove him to hospital, but at this point he was already in cardiac arrest. Danny had to be resuscitated and spent the next 6 weeks in intensive care. Prior to this evening, Danny had been left needing stitches and crutches after he'd been forced to climb inside of a bin with broken glass inside. 2 nights before the night in question, Danny broke down in tears on the phone to his sister and told her about how stressed he felt about it all. His family had begged him to quit the pledge, but he didn't want to be ridiculed. This is Danny now. He will need full-time care for the rest of his life. He's now severely brain damaged, is blind, and cannot walk or talk. 2 former students are set to go to trial over this case. You will not believe this insane plot twist. In 2008, Carolyn Watson and Julian Butchwald were a young religious couple. They were living in Melbourne, Australia, and had been together around 2 years. Julian was driving the pair to a picnic date in the car, but he actually stopped the car suddenly, noticing an animal on the side of the road. Suddenly, something horrific happened. Carolyn's vision went completely black after being blindfolded by a terrifying masked man. All she could work out was she was being stripped off and thrown into a vehicle. The car finally stopped and she took her blindfold off, and she was really relieved to see that her boyfriend was by her side. He'd also been stripped off and the couple were completely in the middle of nowhere. The pair managed to untie themselves, but were having to just wander around aimlessly for a week, trying to find safety. Meanwhile, police were desperately searching for the couple. Family and friends were really concerned, and they knew how out of character this was for the pair to go missing. They sent out air and water search teams, but just couldn't locate the couple. As the missing pair were very religious, they'd actually vowed to be celibate until marriage, but Julian started to suggest that it might be a good idea to break this celibacy in order to keep them warm. Finally, a local farmer found the couple and alerted police. However, they quickly found that the story didn't really add up. Julian soon confessed to police that he'd actually made the whole thing up and he'd staged the kidnapping. His motive was purely to try and get his girlfriend to break their vow of celibacy. This is the UK's most famous missing boy. In September 2007, Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He was a very intelligent boy and was top of his class in most classes at school. He was an introvert that usually spent most of his time at home. The day before Andrew went missing seemed completely normal. He went to school, he had some tea, and then he watched some TV. However, on September the 14th, he seemed more irritable than normal. Instead of getting the bus to school that morning like his parents thought he was, he went to a cash point and withdrew £200. CCTV then captures him walking home, where he changed his clothes into a Slipknot t-shirt. When he left the house, he didn't take his charger with him, and he also didn't take £100 that he'd saved up. He didn't take his passport, but he did take his house key, which indicates he was going to come home. He bought a one-way ticket to London and was last seen leaving King's Cross station at about 11:30. Frustratingly, the school had actually tried to contact Andrew's parents to say that he hadn't turned up to school that day, but they dialed the wrong number and left an answer phone message on the wrong phone. His family was completely cleared of any suspicion, and the family and the school and all of the students went to London and they were handing out loads of flyers. Weirdly, a year after this incident, a man came to a police station to say that he had information about Andrew. Now, the police station was unmanned, so the person spoke to this man just over an intercom system and sent a police officer down there. Mysteriously, by the time the police officer arrived, the person had vanished. This is what Andrew might look like now, just being the age that he may be if he's still alive. Theories about this case is that he may have gone to London to meet up with someone or go to a concert. Was he lured there by somebody with bad intentions, or was he just going there for the day, gonna come back, and was at the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody did something bad to him? In 2009, the family paid for a search of the River Thames to try and find some sort of closure. The search did find a body, but it wasn't Andrew's. The most up-to-date information that we have on this case is that 2 men were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Andrew, but they've actually been released. Shocking case of the Philpotts. On the 11th of May 2012, 6 children were in bed asleep when a huge fire broke out of their home. As smoke roared through the building, Mairead Philpott, the children's mother, called the emergency services. Their dad, Mick Philpott, was reportedly making heroic attempts to try and save them. However, 5 children unfortunately died in the fire, and the eldest actually passed away in hospital later on. At first, this appeared to be a tragic accident, but the truth was soon revealed. The fire had been started intentionally with petrol underneath the letterbox. When word got out about who the children's father was, many people were already familiar with him. Mick Philpott was notorious for being outspoken and provocative and had appeared on The Jeremy Kyle Show. He claimed to have had 2 wives and seemed to be really proud of this. He also had a horrible history of abusive behaviour towards women. He had been convicted for attacking 2 women with a knife and headbutting a female colleague. A press conference was held about the tragedy that had unfolded. Reporters really expected at this point for the Philpotts to come out and appeal to anyone who had any information about the fire. What the Philpotts actually did was just kind of came out and started thanking people. They didn't ask for any help with any information about the case at all. The only thing Mick asked for is to be left alone. If this genuinely had nothing to do with the parents, you would think that they would come out and be desperate for more information. Neighbours from across the road actually went to the police and told them that they had seen Mick during the fire. He was outside pretending to cough, not actually going in trying to help rescue his children. Police were now suspicious enough to try and set a trap for the Philpotts. They kept them in a hotel room and actually bugged the room. The recording reveals Mick quizzing his wife about how convincing she'd been in her police interview. Locals had also spotted the couple in a pub doing karaoke, dancing and drinking shots. Incredibly strange behaviour for 2 people who just lost their children. It also came out that Mick was reportedly flirting with nurses at the hospital where his son was on a life support machine. The true story of what actually happened was all about Mick Philpott getting revenge on his ex. In early 2012, one of his wives had left him. She walked out with 5 of their children and Mick just could not take this rejection. He wanted to do something to get her back and wanted custody of his 5 children with her. He set the fire up to frame the ex to make it look like she'd done it. He wanted to be the heroic dad to save all his children and for his ex to go to prison for it. Mick got life in prison for this. Mairead got 17 years and is now released.